The scanning array flickered to life as Thriss adjusted the neural interface covering the back of his thorax. Around him, 3 other Quentari technicians monitored their instruments with practiced precision. Above them, through the transparent dome of the security station, the human vessel Defiant hung in space like a gray knife. Thriss had performed this routine 1,000 times. Every ship that docked at Galactic Council Station 7 underwent the same procedure. The scan would map the vessel's interior, catalog its systems, verify it carried no prohibited weapons or contraband. Simple, standard, safe. He initiated the deep scan protocol. The data stream hit his consciousness like cold water. Thriss began building the mental model that all Quentari scanners created, a virtual walkthrough of the ship's interior. He stepped into a corridor and immediately felt something wrong. The walls were too thick, not just reinforced but absurdly over-engineered. Blast doors every 20 meters, each one capable of sealing independently. He moved deeper into his scan, examining what should have been simple crew quarters. Each room had emergency oxygen supplies, backup power connections, medical kits mounted on walls, fire suppression systems that seemed excessive for a sleeping area. But it was the small details that made Thriss's antennae quiver with unease. Photos covered the walls, handwritten notes, a child's drawing of a spaceship, a worn book with actual paper pages. These weren't just quarters, these were homes. People lived here expecting to stay here even during combat. Thriss pushed his scan toward the engineering sections. What he found there made him stop the scan abruptly. Redundant systems layered on top of redundant systems. The primary reactor had 2 complete backup systems. Those backups had their own backups. The power distribution network could be manually rerouted through 40 different pathways. Every critical system had a manual override. Every automated system could be controlled by hand if needed. But worse than the redundancy was what it implied. The ship was designed expecting catastrophic damage, not as a possibility, but as a certainty. Every corridor had damage control stations. Every deck had emergency bulkheads that could seal sections independently. The life support system could be divided into dozens of isolated zones, each capable of sustaining life even if the rest of the ship lost atmosphere. Thriss went deeper, unable to stop himself despite growing horror. He examined the weapons systems and found something that chilled his circulatory fluid. The main cannons had backup targeting systems. Those backups had manual aiming mechanisms. If all else failed, crew members could physically aim and fire the weapons using mechanical systems that required no power beyond what a human body could provide. The missile bays contained not just offensive weapons, but also emergency supplies, medical equipment, and spare parts for critical systems. Even the ammunition storage was designed to double as emergency shelter, with reinforced walls and independent life support. Every design choice screamed the same message. This ship expects to be cut apart, burned, blasted into pieces, and it expects to keep fighting. Thriss found the memorial wall in a central corridor. Names etched into metal, hundreds of them, crew members who had died on previous ships bearing the name Defiant. The list went back 200 years. The humans didn't just build ships, they built legacies. Each vessel inherited the name, the honor, and the expectations of every ship that came before. Thriss severed the connection and stumbled backward. His colleagues rushed to support him as his legs trembled. "Sir, what happened? The scan cut off," one of them said. Thriss looked up at the Defiant through the dome. It looked like an ordinary warship, but he had seen inside it now. He had felt the weight of its design philosophy, the crushing determination embedded in every rivet and weld. "Power down the scanning array," Thriss said quietly. "Sir, we haven't completed the security scan. Protocol requires." "I said power it down." Thriss's voice carried an edge his team had never heard before. Contact the docking authority. Tell them the human vessel needs to be moved to a different bay. On what grounds? Thriss struggled to find words. How could he explain what he had experienced? That the ship itself was a weapon not because of what it carried, but because of what it represented. That scanning it felt like drowning in an ocean of grim determination. Tell them it's for the safety of scanning personnel. Psychological protection protocols. His second-in-command looked confused, but began drafting the message. Thriss moved to the communications panel and opened a direct line to the station's administrative office. Ambassador Rachel Foster's face appeared on the screen. The human woman looked tired but professional. Ambassador Foster, this is Scanning Chief Thriss. I need to request that your escort vessel be relocated immediately. Rachel's expression shifted to concern. Is there a problem with the Defiant? Has something been found? No contraband, no prohibited weapons. The ship meets all technical requirements for docking. Thriss paused, choosing his words carefully. But my team cannot complete the scan. We are implementing protective measures for our personnel. I don't understand. Your people scan ships every day. What's different about the Defiant? Thriss looked at the human vessel again. How could he explain that her people built warships like other species built monuments? That every human military vessel he had heard about carried the same disturbing qualities, the same refusal to accept that destruction meant defeat. Ambassador, has your government received complaints before about scanning human warships? Rachel's face showed genuine confusion. No, not that I'm aware of. Why would there be complaints? Thriss realized she truly didn't know. The humans built their ships this way naturally, without understanding how deeply unsettling it was to species who approached warfare differently. Please check your diplomatic files, Ambassador. I believe you will find this is not the first time an allied species has requested that human military vessels not be scanned in detail. My people simply wish to be added to that list. Rachel nodded slowly. I'll look into it. In the meantime, I'll contact Captain Park and arrange for the Defiant to move to Bay 12. Will that be sufficient? Thank you, Ambassador. That will be acceptable. The screen went dark. Thriss turned to find his entire team watching him with questions in their eyes. What did you see in there? His second asked quietly. Thriss thought about the memorial wall, the redundant systems, the expectation of catastrophic damage built into every design choice. I saw a ship built by people who refuse to lose, he said finally, and I hope we never have to fight them. Rachel Foster sat in her office 3 decks below the observation dome, staring at her computer screen with growing disbelief. She had spent the last 4 hours digging through diplomatic files, and what she found made no sense. 47 formal requests from various species asking that human warships be exempted from standard scanning procedures. 47. All filed within the last 5 years, all approved without explanation, all buried in bureaucratic language that made them nearly invisible unless someone knew to look. The Vaulting Concordat had filed the first request 3 years ago. Then the Horath Federation, the Methric Collective, even the normally unflappable Zenthi had quietly requested exemption from scanning human military vessels. Rachel highlighted a particularly strange phrase that appeared in multiple requests: culturally sensitive military architecture. What did that even mean? She opened a secure communication channel to an old friend from her diplomatic training days. Crystallis had retired from the Vaulting military 2 years ago and now lived on a quiet colony world, far from the politics of the Galactic Council. The crystalline being's face appeared on her screen, geometric patterns shifting across its translucent surface. Rachel Foster, I wondered when you would call. You knew I'd be looking into this. Every human ambassador eventually does. When your people start asking questions about why we won't scan your warships, Crystalliz's patterns dimmed slightly. I was the one who filed the initial request for the vaulting concordat. Rachel leaned forward. Can you tell me what happened? The official report just says you experienced psychological distress during a routine scan. Crystallis was quiet for a long moment. The patterns on its surface moved in slow, contemplative waves. Do you know how vaulting scanning technology works? Rachel. Neural interface. You create a mental model of the ship's interior. More than that, we don't just see the ship, we experience it. We walk through it as if we're physically there. We feel the purpose embedded in its design. Crystalliz's patterns flickered rapidly. 3 years ago, I scanned a human destroyer. The Unyielding, I think it was called. What did you find? Everything, and that was the problem. Crystalliz's voice carried a weight Rachel had never heard before. Your ships are not like ours, Rachel. When I scan a vaulting warship, I feel efficiency, purpose, clean lines and logical systems. When I scan a Horath vessel, I feel their love of elegant engineering. The Methric build ships that sing with energy patterns. And human ships. I felt determination. Grim, unyielding, terrifying determination. Crystalliz's patterns went completely still. Every corridor I walked through in my mind had emergency systems. Every room had backup supplies. The crew quarters were designed to be sealed off and used as independent survival pods. The medical bay had enough equipment to perform surgery in zero gravity in the dark, with half the systems offline. Rachel tried to imagine what Crystallis was describing. That sounds like good engineering. Redundancy is important in space. You don't understand, it's not just redundancy, it's expectation. Crystallis's patterns began moving again, agitated now. Your people don't build backup systems in case something goes wrong. You build them assuming everything will go wrong, simultaneously, while under enemy fire, in the dark, with half the crew dead. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow. I found the damage control stations, Crystallis continued. Every 50 meters throughout the entire ship, each one fully stocked with repair equipment, firefighting gear, medical supplies, emergency rations. I found manual override controls for systems that should never need manual operation. I found weapons that could be aimed and fired by hand if all power failed. But why does that disturb you? Because it means your people expect to fight while dying, Crystallis said quietly. Every other species in the Galactic Council builds warships to win battles or retreat to fight another day. You build warships to keep fighting no matter what, to refuse surrender even when the ship is breaking apart around the crew. Rachel felt something cold settle in her stomach, and this is true of all human warships. I have spoken with scanners from 6 different species. All report the same experience. The Horath technician who scanned one of your carriers had to take medical leave for 2 months afterward. The Methric who examined a human battleship requested reassignment to civilian duties. What did they see? The carrier had a memorial wall, names of every crew member who died on that ship. The list was so long it covered 3 entire corridors. Crystallis's patterns dimmed again. The Methric found something worse. Your battleships carry spare parts not just for repairs, but to rebuild entire sections of the ship if necessary. They found construction equipment, raw materials. Your people don't just expect damage. They expect to be stranded, alone, and still able to rebuild and continue fighting. Rachel thought about human naval history. The ships that fought at Midway, at Leyte Gulf, in the South Atlantic. Ships that took torpedoes and bombs and kept fighting. Submarines that surfaced to engage enemy destroyers with deck guns when their torpedoes ran out. We come from a water world, Rachel said slowly. For thousands of years, our ships went to sea knowing they might never come back, knowing they might be caught in storms or face enemies with superior firepower or be stranded far from home. We built our ships to survive the worst we could imagine, and then we imagined worse. And you brought that philosophy to space, Crystallis said, which is why we won't scan your vessels anymore. because seeing inside them means understanding what kind of warfare your species considers normal. It means confronting the reality that humans build every warship expecting it to become a tomb that continues fighting. Rachel wanted to argue to defend human ship design as merely practical, but she couldn't, because Crystallis was right. Is that why the requests call it culturally sensitive? Yes, because if our young officers and crew members understood how you design warships, they would start questioning our own doctrines. They would see our ships as fragile. They would wonder why we don't build for the same level of catastrophic damage. It would fundamentally change how they think about warfare. Crystallis's patterns shifted to something that might have been respect. Your ships are not weapons, Rachel. They are statements. They say that humans do not accept defeat, even when defeat should be inevitable, and that terrifies every species in the galaxy. Rachel ended the call and sat in silence, looking at the files scattered across her screen. 47 requests, 47 species who had looked inside human warships and chosen to look away. She understood now, and understanding changed everything. The conference room on Station 7 held representatives from 9 different species. Rachel had called this meeting herself, requesting a closed session with military analysts from each major Galactic Council member. She needed to understand the full scope of what she had discovered. Gills, the Horath Fleet Coordinator, rippled his skin in the gesture his species used for greeting. His amphibious features showed concern as Rachel took her seat at the circular table. Ambassador Foster, we appreciate you bringing this matter into the open, Gills said, his translator rendering his bubbling speech into clear standard language. Many of us have wanted to discuss this with human representatives, but we're unsure how to approach such a culturally sensitive topic. I want the truth, Rachel said simply. All of it. Why does every species refuse to scan our warships? A Methric representative named Pulse, its energy form contained in a translucent suit, spoke next. Its voice crackled like static. Because understanding human military philosophy is dangerous to our own military traditions. We have different approaches to warfare, Ambassador. Very different. Explain. Gills activated a holographic display at the center of the table. 2 ship schematics appeared side by side. On the left, a Horath cruiser. On the right, a human destroyer of comparable size. This is our newest military vessel, Gills said, gesturing to the Horath ship. Notice the central core containing all critical systems. Crew quarters here, separated from combat areas by multiple safety barriers. Automated systems throughout, with centralized computer control. In the event of catastrophic damage, the crew quarters can detach and escape independently. Rachel studied the schematic. It was elegant, efficient. The ship was designed to protect its crew above all else. Gills switched to the human destroyer schematic. This is your ship, Resolute. Notice the difference immediately. Critical systems distributed throughout the vessel. No single point of failure. Crew quarters integrated into every section. Manual controls alongside every automated system. Damage control stations every 40 meters. No escape pods for crew. We have lifeboats, Rachel said defensively. You have minimal evacuation capacity for critical personnel only, Pulse interjected. Your crew-to-lifeboat ratio is 5-to-1. You design ships expecting most of the crew to stay aboard no matter what happens. Rachel felt heat rise in her face. Our sailors don't abandon ship while it can still fight. Exactly, Gills said quietly. That is exactly what disturbs us. The hologram zoomed in on different sections of both ships. Gills highlighted the power systems first. A Horath cruiser has 1 primary reactor and 1 backup. If the primary is damaged beyond 70% efficiency, the backup activates and the ship retreats for repairs. He moved to the human ship. Your destroyer has 1 primary reactor, 2 secondary reactors, and 16 emergency power cells distributed throughout the ship. If the primary reactor is destroyed, you can continue operating on secondary power indefinitely. If those fail, the emergency cells can maintain life support and weapons for up to 48 hours. And the problem with that is what? We like being thorough. A Zenthi observer, its insectoid body motionless, clicked its mandibles. The problem is what it implies about human combat doctrine. You do not build ships to win battles. You build ships to endure them. Pulse's energy form flickered rapidly. I performed one of the few complete scans of a human carrier 3 years ago. What I found still haunts my consciousness. Every deck had independent life support. Every section could be sealed and operated autonomously. The ship could be cut into 20 pieces, and each piece would still have power, air, and the ability to communicate and coordinate with the others. That's good engineering, Rachel insisted. That's preparation for dismemberment, Gill said bluntly. You design ships expecting them to be torn apart by enemy fire and continue fighting as scattered pieces. What kind of warfare have you experienced that makes this seem normal? Rachel thought about Earth's history, about submarine warfare in the Atlantic, surface actions in the Pacific, the Falklands War, the Gulf conflicts, about ships burning and flooding and still fighting. Water covers 70% of our planet, she said slowly. For thousands of years, navies fought on that water, far from support, facing enemies that often had superior numbers or technology. Ships that retreated too easily were considered cowards. Ships that kept fighting against impossible odds became legends. She pulled up images from human naval history. The HMS Glowworm ramming a heavy cruiser. The USS Johnston charging battleships at Samar. The crew of the Bismarck fighting until their ship was a burning hulk. We had a saying in our wet navies, "Don't give up the ship." It became more than just words. It became doctrine. A captain who surrendered a ship that could still fight faced court-martial. We built ships that could always still fight, no matter how badly damaged. The room was silent. Gill studied the historical images with an expression Rachel couldn't quite read. You brought that philosophy to space, he said finally. You build starships the way you built ocean ships, as if they're isolated, unsupported, expected to face superior forces and continue fighting anyway. Yes. Pulse's form dimmed. 3 cycles ago, a young Methric officer scanned one of your battleships without authorization. He wanted to understand human engineering. What he found changed him. He began advocating for more resilient ship designs, for backup systems, for distributed critical infrastructure. He questioned our entire naval doctrine. Is that a bad thing? It caused division in our fleet command. Young officers began viewing our ships as fragile, as inadequate. They saw human warships and felt their own vessels were designed to give up too easily. Pulse's energy crackled with what might have been frustration. Your design philosophy is like a virus ambassador. Once someone truly understands it, they cannot see warfare the same way again. Rachel looked around the table at the assembled representatives. So the ban on scanning our ships is not about security. It's about protecting your own military cultures from contamination. Protecting is perhaps too strong a word, Gill said. But yes, we have different traditions, different approaches to acceptable losses, different definitions of when a battle is truly lost. Exposing our officers to human philosophy undermines those traditions. Rachel stood and looked at each representative in turn. Then let me be clear. We will not change how we build our ships. This is who we are. This is how we approach warfare. If that makes you uncomfortable, then yes, don't scan our vessels. But understand that we consider this the only rational way to build a warship. We do understand, Gill said gently. That is precisely what frightens us. Whisper was only 23 cycles old, young for a Quintari scanner technician. She had taken the job because she loved understanding how things worked, loved the feeling of walking through virtual spaces and seeing the elegance of good engineering. She had been assigned to scan the human battleship Indomitable 3 weeks ago, before the ban was fully implemented across all Quintari installations. Her supervisor had warned her that the experience might be unsettling, but Whisper had insisted. She needed to understand why everyone was so disturbed by human warships. Now she sat in a medical consultation room, trying to explain to Dr. Shimmer what she had experienced. "I don't sleep well anymore," Whisper said quietly, her antennae drooping. "When I close my eyes, I'm back in those corridors." Shimmer, a methric counselor specializing in scanner trauma, flickered with concern. "Tell me what you saw, in your own words at your own pace." Whisper's thorax trembled slightly. "I started with the bridge, like always. That's usually the most interesting part of any ship, the command center where decisions are made." "And what did you find?" "Redundancy. The main computer core had 2 complete backup systems, but more than that, every station on the bridge could be controlled manually. I found mechanical controls hidden under panels, controls that would work even if every computer on the ship failed. I found paper charts and maps stored in sealed containers. Paper, Doctor, in case the digital systems all went down." Shimmer pulsed thoughtfully. "That seems excessive but not necessarily traumatic." "That was just the start." Whisper's voice grew quieter. "I moved through the ship examining each section, and everywhere I went I felt it, this overwhelming sense of preparation for disaster." "Felt it how?" "Quintari neural scanning technology picks up emotional resonance embedded in design and use. When I scan a Quintari ship, I feel pride, efficiency, confidence. When I scanned the Indomitable, I felt determination. Cold, hard, unyielding determination." Whisper stood and began packing, her legs moving in the agitated pattern of distress. The crew quarters were the worst. Each room had personal items, just like any ship, but they also had emergency oxygen supplies rated for 72 hours, backup power connections, medical kits more extensive than most species keep in their actual medical bays, and the walls, Doctor. The walls were covered in photos and letters and children's drawings. "Why does that disturb you?" "Because it means they bring their families into battle with them, not physically but emotionally. They surround themselves with reminders of what they're fighting for, even in the most dangerous parts of the ship. They don't compartmentalize. They don't separate combat from life. It's all one thing to them." Shimmer's energy form brightened slightly. "That could be seen as beautiful, fighting for loved ones." "You don't understand." Whisper stopped packing and faced the methric counselor. "I found the memorial walls. Every human warship has them. Lists of crew members who died on previous vessels carrying that name. The Indomitable's list went back 300 years and covered an entire corridor. 300 years of death commemorated and carried forward. They don't just remember their dead, they inherit them." Shimmer was quiet for a moment. "Go on." "I examined the weapons systems next. The main cannons had backup power supplies, manual aiming mechanisms, mechanical firing systems that could work without any computer control. I found missiles that could be launched by hand if necessary. I found a crew manual that included instructions for using the ship's emergency thrusters to ram enemy vessels if all weapons failed." Whisper's antennae were shaking now. "They don't just plan for damage, Doctor. They plan for total systems failure. They plan to keep fighting when the ship is dead. When any rational species would surrender or evacuate, humans plan to continue the battle." "Did you examine the engineering sections?" "Yes, and that's when I had to stop the scan." Whisper sat down heavily. "The engineering sections had repair supplies for every possible failure mode, spare parts for systems that had 3 layers of backup, raw materials to fabricate new components, tools for cutting through bulkheads, welding in vacuum, performing repairs while under fire. I found emergency procedures for restarting the reactor after complete shutdown. I found instructions for converting the ship's water supply into emergency oxygen if the life support system failed." These all seem like reasonable precautions for space travel. No, Whisper's voice was firm now. Reasonable precautions are what the rest of us do. Humans prepare for scenarios that should never happen. That can't happen if you follow proper retreat protocols. They design every system assuming they'll be alone, unsupported, damaged beyond what should be survivable, and still required to complete their mission. Shimmer pulsed in a pattern that indicated understanding. You saw their combat doctrine embedded in the ship itself. Exactly. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I started thinking about our own ships, our own military. We build ships that retreat when damaged beyond 60% efficiency. We consider crew safety paramount. We have protocols for surrender if outmatched. And humans. Humans have protocols for continued combat even after death. I found emergency procedures for when the captain is killed, and when the replacement captain is killed, and when the third in command is killed. They have a succession list that goes down to junior officers barely out of training. They plan to keep fighting no matter how many commanders die. Whisper looked at her hands, seeing them tremble. I requested transfer to civilian scanning duties after I finished the Indomitable. I can't scan military vessels anymore, because every time I do, I compare them to that human battleship, and every other species' ships feel fragile, inadequate, like we're not taking warfare seriously. Has your supervisor addressed this with you? She told me I experienced exactly what the council was worried about: cultural contamination. That's why they banned scanning human warships. Not because humans are hiding anything, but because seeing inside their ships changes how you think about combat, makes you question whether your own species is prepared enough. Shimmer flickered rapidly, processing this information. What would you say is the core difference between human warship design and that of other species? Whisper thought for a long moment before answering. Most species build warships to win battles. Humans build warships to survive them. We design our ships hopping to never take serious damage. They design their ships knowing damage is inevitable and planning to fight through it. She paused. And the disturbing part is not that they're wrong. The disturbing part is wondering if they might be right. Rachel spent 2 weeks preparing her presentation for the Galactic Council. She wanted them to understand not just what human warships were, but why they were built that way. Understanding the history was crucial to understanding the philosophy. The council chamber was nearly full when she arrived. Representatives from 32 species had requested to attend this educational session. Word had spread that the human ambassador was finally going to explain her species' disturbing approach to naval architecture. Rachel stood at the central podium and began without preamble. My people evolved on a planet where water covers 70% of the surface. For thousands of years before we reached space, we fought wars on that water. Those wars shaped how we think about ships, about combat, about what it means to serve aboard a military vessel. The holographic display activated behind her, showing ancient wooden sailing ships engaged in battle. Cannon fire, splintered wood, torn sails. These vessels were made of wood and canvas. They traveled for months without resupply. When they encountered enemy ships far from friendly ports, they had two choices: fight or die. Running was often impossible. Surrender meant imprisonment or death, so they fought. She advanced the display to show ships with missing masts, burning decks, crews fighting with pistols and swords on tilting decks. We developed a culture around these ships, a set of expectations. A captain who gave up his ship while it could still fight was considered a coward and a traitor. Crews were expected to continue fighting even when victory seemed impossible. Ships that won against superior odds became legends. The display shifted to more modern vessels, steel warships from humanity's industrial age. As technology advanced, the ships changed, but the philosophy remained. We built ships to keep fighting no matter how badly damaged. We trained crews to perform damage control, firefighting, and emergency repairs while under enemy fire. We expected our ships to take hits and continue their missions. Rachel showed footage from human naval history. Ships listing heavily but still firing their guns. Submarines damaged and surfacing to fight with deck guns. Destroyers charging battleships to protect carriers. In one battle, a small destroyer escort called the Samuel Roberts faced Japanese battleships and cruisers many times its size. It was outgunned, outarmored, completely outmatched. It charged anyway. It fought for hours against impossible odds. When its ammunition ran out, the crew fired star shells, illumination rounds, anything they had just to keep fighting. The ship sank, but the crew's sacrifice helped save the larger fleet. The chamber was completely silent. Rachel could see Gills leaning forward, his skin patterns showing intense focus. That ship earned a nickname, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship. That story, and hundreds like it, shaped our naval tradition. We honor ships and crews that refuse to surrender. We build vessels that can continue fighting even when logic says they should already be dead. She changed the display to show human spacecraft. The same design philosophy was evident even in vessels that would never touch water. When we went to space, we brought those traditions with us. We design our ships expecting them to operate alone, far from support. We assume they'll face enemies with superior firepower. We build them to survive catastrophic damage and keep fighting, because that's what our history taught us ships must do. Captain David Park had sent Rachel footage from actual damage control drills aboard the Defiant. The display now showed human crew members practicing firefighting in zero gravity, sealing hull breaches while wearing emergency suits, manually routing power around damaged systems. Every crew member on a human warship trains for disaster. They don't just know their regular duties. They know how to fight fires, patch holes, treat injuries, operate backup systems, and continue their missions when everything has gone wrong. This isn't pessimism. It's realism based on thousands of years of naval combat experience. Rachel paused and looked around the chamber. You've all heard the phrase we use, "Don't give up the ship." It comes from the last words of a dying captain in an ancient water battle. His ship was badly damaged, his crew was being killed around him, and his last order was to keep fighting. Those words became our naval motto. They're engraved on monuments, taught to every new recruit, embedded in how we design and operate our vessels. The display showed memorial walls from various human warships, names upon names, stretching back centuries for some of the older ship lineages. We name our ships after previous vessels that carried the name with honor. When a ship is destroyed, we build another and give it the same name. The crew inherits not just the name but the responsibility of living up to it. These memorial walls remind them that they're part of a tradition that stretches back through time. Counselor Trent of the Vaultine Concordat raised a crystalline appendage. Ambassador Foster, all of this explains your design philosophy, but it does not change the fact that exposing our military personnel to this philosophy causes cultural disruption. Young officers who see inside your ships begin questioning our own doctrines. I understand that concern, Rachel said, and I'm not asking you to change your approach to warfare, but I need you to understand that we won't change ours either. When a human warship is built with backup systems for backup systems, it's not paranoia. It's tradition based on experience. Shimmer, the Methric counselor, flickered thoughtfully. What you're describing is a fundamental philosophical difference in how we approach acceptable losses and combat duration. Exactly. Most species design warships for decisive engagement. Fight, determine a winner, move on. We design for attrition, for prolonged campaigns, for situations where retreat is impossible and surrender is unthinkable. Because that's what your water navies experienced, Gills said, understanding evident in his voice. Yes, our ships went to sea knowing they might face storms that would destroy them, knowing they might encounter enemy fleets too powerful to defeat, knowing they might be stranded far from home with no hope of rescue. We built them to survive those scenarios, and when they couldn't survive, we expected the crews to go down fighting. Rachel let that sink in before continuing. The memorial walls, the redundant systems, the expectation that crew will stay with the ship until it's completely destroyed, these all serve the same purpose. They communicate to everyone aboard that this vessel will not surrender, that the mission comes first, that we keep fighting no matter what. The council chamber remained quiet for several moments. Finally, a senior Zenthi counselor clicked its mandibles in the pattern that indicated it wished to speak. "We understand now, Ambassador Foster, and understanding does not make it less disturbing. You build every warship expecting it to become a tomb that continues fighting." Rachel met the counselor's multifaceted gaze. "No, counselor. We build every warship expecting it to become a home that refuses to die." Border Station 7 orbited a dead moon at the edge of Galactic Council territory. Shimmer had commanded the station for 6 years, managing trade routes and monitoring the frontier. In all that time, nothing particularly exciting had happened. That changed when the proximity alarms began screaming. "Hostile contacts." The sensor operator, a young Horeth named Ripple, pulled up the tactical display. Kryn swarm vessels, multiple signatures, counting 32, no, 47 contacts inbound. Shimmer's energy form pulsed with alarm. The Kryn were known raiders, traveling in overwhelming numbers to compensate for their inferior technology. But this many vessels attacking a council station was unprecedented. "Broadcast distress signal on all frequencies. Begin civilian evacuation protocols." Shimmer checked the defensive systems. Station 7 had weapons, but they were designed to deter pirates, not repel a full-scale assault. How long until the closest council ship can respond? Quentari cruiser Harmonious Sky is 2 hours away at maximum speed. 2 hours. Shimmer looked at the tactical plot. The Kryn would be in weapons range in 20 minutes. Any other vessels in range? Ripple checked the scanner. One human destroyer, the Resolute, currently in the 4th sector performing patrol duties. They're 30 minutes out if they respond immediately. Hail them. The communication screen flickered to life, showing a human male in a dark blue uniform. His face was weathered, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes sharp and alert. "This is Captain David Park of the Resolute. We've picked up your distress signal, Station 7. We're changing course to assist." "Captain Park, we're facing 47 hostile vessels. Your ship is." "I can see the tactical plot, Commander Shimmer. We'll be there in 30 minutes. Park's expression didn't change. "Focus on your evacuation. We'll buy you time." The screen went dark before Shimmer could protest. 30 minutes later, the Resolute emerged from its jump point and immediately engaged the Kryn swarm. Shimmer watched on the tactical display, horrified and fascinated. The human destroyer was outnumbered 20-1. It should have retreated, called for backup, waited for the Quentari cruiser. Instead, it dove into the swarm like a knife into water. The Resolute's weapons fired with precision, each shot finding a target. 3 Kryn ships exploded in rapid succession, but there were too many. Return fire hammered the destroyer's shields, overwhelming them within minutes. "Resolute is taking heavy damage," Ripple reported. "Hull breaches on decks 3, 4, and 7. They've lost forward weapons." But the destroyer didn't retreat. It rolled, bringing undamaged weapon batteries to bear. More Kryn ships died. The swarm began focusing all fire on the Resolute, exactly as Captain Park must have planned. "They're drawing the enemy away from us," Shimmer realized, "giving us time to evacuate." The Resolute shuddered under sustained fire. Shimmer watched the damage reports pile up. Main reactor at 60%. Weapons systems failing. Life support compromised in multiple sections. Any Council ship would have withdrawn by now. The Resolute kept fighting. "Captain Park, you need to retreat," Shimmer broadcast. "You've given us enough time, save your ship." Park's voice came back steady despite the sound of alarms in the background. "Negative, Station 7. Enemy forces still in position to attack you. We're still in the fight." The Resolute lost its main reactor. Emergency power kicked in automatically. The ship's weapons fire slowed but didn't stop. The destroyer was fighting on backup systems, exactly as its designers had intended. A Kryn missile got through the point defense. It struck the Resolute amidships, tearing a hole the size of a shuttle through the hull. "Multiple casualties reported on Resolute," Ripple said quietly. "They're venting atmosphere from 6 sections." The destroyer sealed the damaged areas and continued firing. Shimmer realized with growing horror that the human crew was doing exactly what they'd been trained to do. They were staying at their posts, fighting their ship even as it was torn apart around them. "How many Kryn vessels have they destroyed?" Shimmer asked. 11 confirmed kills, 8 heavily damaged and withdrawing. 1 ship against 47, and the humans had killed 11. The Resolute lost its remaining primary weapons, but the crew switched to point defense guns, using weapons designed to shoot down missiles to engage the Kryn ships at close range. It was desperate, improvised, and somehow still effective. By the time the Harmonious Sky arrived with reinforcements, the Resolute was barely recognizable. Hull breached in dozens of places, main systems offline, drifting in space with only emergency power keeping a handful of sections habitable. But the Kryn swarm had withdrawn. Station 7 was safe. Shimmer led the rescue operation personally, taking a shuttle to the crippled destroyer. The docking collar connected to one of the few intact airlocks. What Shimmer found inside would stay with the Methric commander forever. The crew was still at their stations. Damage control teams were still working to seal breaches. The engineering staff was trying to restart the reactor. In the medical bay, wounded crew members were treating each other while preparing to return to duty. Captain Park was on the bridge, one arm in an improvised sling, blood on his uniform, calmly giving orders to prepare the ship for towing. "Captain Park," Shimmer said quietly, "your ship is destroyed." Park looked around his bridge. Emergency lighting cast everything in red. Half the consoles were dead. The deck was tilted at an angle from structural damage. One bulkhead showed stars through a patch job that wouldn't hold an atmosphere. "Not destroyed, Commander, damaged. There's a difference." He pulled up a damage report on a flickering screen. "Main reactor can be repaired. Hull breaches can be patched. We lost 38 crew, but 412 are still operational. Resolute remains mission-capable with support." Shimmer looked at the human captain and understood, truly understood, what Crystallis and Gills and all the others had been trying to explain. The ship was a wreck. By any rational standard, it was mission-killed, ready for salvage. But Park still classified it as mission-capable because humans didn't measure ship effectiveness the same way other species did. "We need to evacuate your crew for medical treatment," Shimmer said. "Agreed, but I'm staying aboard with a skeleton crew. We can still provide sensor coverage and coordinate communications." "Captain, your ship has no power, no weapons, no engines." "We have emergency power, backup communications, and functional sensors. That's enough." Park met Shimmer's gaze. "Commander, I appreciate the rescue, but we don't abandon ship while she can still serve." Shimmer helped coordinate the rescue of wounded crew members while Park and 20 others remained aboard. The Quentari cruiser began towing the Resolute back to Council space. 3 days later, Shimmer filed the official report. At the bottom, below the casualty figures and damage assessments, the Methric commander added a personal note. "I performed a scan of the human destroyer Resolute during rescue operations. I know this violates Council policy regarding human warships. I submit this report knowing I may face disciplinary action, but I needed to understand. What I found confirms everything we feared and everything we should respect about human naval architecture. Every system had backups. Every section could function independently. The crew quarters were filled with personal items and family photos, even in areas that had lost atmosphere and would never be habitable again. I found the memorial wall, 63 names from previous ships named Resolute. Now 38 more will be added. But more than the hardware or the design philosophy, I felt something when I walked through that broken ship. I felt the determination that kept the crew at their posts while their vessel was being destroyed. I felt the refusal to surrender that kept them fighting with emergency power and improvised weapons. Other species build warships to win battles. Humans build warships to endure them. They design every system expecting catastrophic failure and continued operation. They train every crew member to keep fighting no matter how bad the damage. And after witnessing the Resolute in combat, after seeing what one human destroyer accomplished against impossible odds, I have only one conclusion. They're right to build their ships that way. And we're right to refuse to look inside them. Because once you understand how humans approach warfare, you can never see combat the same way again. I recommend the Resolute and her crew for the Council's highest honor for defense of civilian populations. I also recommend permanent implementation of the no-scan policy for human warships. Not because they're dangerous, but because they're disturbing in ways that change how you think about what it means to fight. Shimmer transmitted the report and returned to watching the stars, thinking about a destroyed ship that refused to die and a crew that wouldn't abandon their home, even when their home was breaking apart around them. The humans called it tradition. The rest of the galaxy called it disturbing. Both were correct.